What happens when one of comedy's biggest stars sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find himself defending his entire career against accusations that threaten to tear down everything he's built? Today, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation that had Kevin Hart walking off the Jenna and Friends show in the middle of filming, leaving the studio audience stunned and the internet buzzing with controversy. Before we get into this wild story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think really went down behind the scenes, because this story has layers that will blow your mind. So here's what happened. Kevin Hart walked into Studio 12 at Paramount, expecting another typical promotional interview for his latest comedy special. The Jenna and Friends show had been hyping this appearance for weeks, with Jenna Martinez promising her audience an intimate conversation with the comedian about his journey, his family, and his upcoming projects. What nobody expected was for the interview to turn into a full-blown interrogation that would expose some uncomfortable truths about Hollywood's comedy scene. Jenna Martinez, known for her hard-hitting questions disguised as friendly banter, had done her homework. She'd spent weeks researching not just Kevin's recent work, but diving deep into his past controversies, his relationships with other comedians, and some behind-the-scenes drama that most people thought had been buried years ago. The interview started innocently enough. Kevin walked onto the brightly lit set, wearing his signature confident smile, waving to the live studio audience who erupted in cheers and applause. He settled into the plush interview chair across from Jenna, adjusting his microphone and cracking a few quick jokes that had everyone laughing within the first 30 seconds. "Kevin Hart, everybody," Jenna announced to thunderous applause. "Thank you so much for being here today. I have to say, you look fantastic. How are you feeling about this new special?" Kevin leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Feeling incredible, Jenna. This special represents everything I've learned about life, about comedy, about connecting with people. It's probably the most honest I've ever been on stage." "Honest," Jenna repeated, her tone still warm, but with just a hint of something else underneath. "That's interesting you use that word. Honesty seems to be something that's really important to you these days." "Absolutely," Kevin replied without hesitation. "Look, I've been through a lot in my career, in my personal life. I've made mistakes, I've learned from them, and I think that's what people connect with. They see someone who's real, who's not perfect, but who's trying to be better every day." The audience murmured their approval, and for a moment it seemed like this was going to be one of those feel-good interviews where everyone leaves happy. But Jenna had other plans. "Speaking of honesty and learning from mistakes," she said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, "I want to talk about something that's been bothering me, and I think it's been bothering a lot of people in the comedy community." Kevin's smile faltered just slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Okay, what's on your mind?" "There's been talk, Kevin? Talk about how you handle competition in the comedy world. Specifically, there are some comedians who feel like you've used your influence to shut them out of opportunities." The studio fell silent. This wasn't the direction anyone had expected the interview to take, least of all Kevin Hart himself. He shifted in his seat, his media-trained smile still in place, but his eyes showing the first signs of confusion and concern. "I'm not sure I follow," Kevin said carefully. "What exactly are you referring to?" Jenna leaned forward slightly, her interviewer instincts kicking into high gear. "Well, let's start with Marcus Williams. You remember Marcus, don't you? You two came up together in Philadelphia's comedy scene. He was actually getting bigger laughs than you at some of the same clubs you both performed at." "Of course I remember Marcus," Kevin replied, his voice becoming more guarded. "He's a talented comedian. We've always been cool." "Have you, though?" Jenna pressed. "Because I spoke with Marcus last week, and he told me a very different story about your friendship. He says that when you started getting your first movie deals, you actively worked to keep him from getting auditions for the same projects." The color was starting to drain from Kevin's face, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Jenna, I don't know what Marcus told you, but that's not how the industry works. I don't control who gets auditions for what projects." "Maybe not directly," Jenna continued, "but you do have influence. You have relationships with casting directors, producers, agents, and according to Marcus, and I'm quoting him here, you told several people in the industry that he wasn't ready for the big time, that he needed more seasoning." Kevin's jaw tightened. Look, if I ever gave advice about any comedian, it was because someone asked for my honest opinion. That's what people in this industry do for each other." "Your honest opinion?" Jenna repeated again, and there was definitely something accusatory in her tone now. "Or were you protecting your territory? Because here's what I find interesting. Kevin Marcus wasn't the only one. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that something significant was happening. Kevin Hart, one of the most successful comedians in the world, was being called out on national television, and nobody knew how he was going to respond. "What do you mean he wasn't the only one?" Kevin asked, and for the first time since the interview began, there was real tension in his voice. "I mean, there's a pattern here. Over the past 15 years, as your career has skyrocketed, there have been at least 6 comedians, all African-American men, all from similar backgrounds to yours, who have told remarkably similar stories about how opportunities seemed to dry up for them right around the time they started getting attention in Hollywood." Kevin was no longer smiling. "Jenna, I think you're crossing a line here. You're making accusations without any proof, and you're trying to paint me as some kind of saboteur in my own community." "I'm not trying to paint you as anything, Kevin. I'm asking you to address what multiple people are saying. These aren't random accusations from strangers. These are people who knew you, who considered you a friend." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Camera operators were adjusting their angles to capture every micro-expression on Kevin's face, while the studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was quickly becoming one of the most uncomfortable celebrity interviews in recent memory. Kevin took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Okay, let me be very clear about something. Comedy is a competitive business. Always has been, always will be. Not everyone is going to make it to the level they want to reach. That's not about me or anyone else holding them back. That's just reality." "But Kevin," Jenna interrupted, "we're not talking about natural competition here. We're talking about active interference, about phone calls made to discourage casting decisions, about recommendations that certain comedians weren't right for certain projects." "Who told you this?" Kevin demanded, his composure finally starting to crack. "Because whoever is feeding you this information is lying, and they're doing it to damage my reputation." Jenna reached for a folder that had been sitting on the small table next to her chair. "Actually, Kevin, I have something I think you should see." Jenna opened the folder with deliberate slowness, her eyes never leaving Kevin's face as she pulled out what appeared to be several printed pages. The studio lights reflected off the white paper as she held them up, just enough for Kevin to see, but not enough for the cameras to capture the details. "These are email transcripts, Kevin, between you and your management team at Heartbeat Productions. Would you like me to read some excerpts, or would you prefer to explain them yourself?" Kevin's entire demeanor shifted in that moment. The confident, media-savvy superstar that millions of fans knew and loved was replaced by someone who looked genuinely rattled. His hands, which had been gesturing casually throughout the interview, were now gripped tightly to the arms of his chair. "Jenna, I don't know where you got those documents, but if they're real emails from my company, then you've obtained them illegally. And if they're fake, then you're about to commit slander on live television." "They're real, Kevin," Jenna said calmly, "and they were provided to me by someone who felt the comedy community deserved to know the truth. Someone who was tired of watching talented people get pushed aside while you climbed higher and higher." The audience was shifting uncomfortably. In their seats, this had gone way beyond typical celebrity interview territory. This was investigative journalism happening in real time, and Kevin Hart was being cornered with evidence he clearly hadn't expected to face. "Let me read you just one email," Jenna continued, adjusting her glasses as she looked down at the papers. "This is from you to your manager, Rebecca Chen, regarding comedian Terrell Jackson. You wrote, and I quote, 'Rebecca, we need to make sure Terrell doesn't get the Netflix special they're considering him for. He's too similar to my brand, and I can't have him diluting the market right when I'm negotiating my next deal. Use whatever connections you have at Netflix to steer them toward someone else.'" The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin's face had gone completely pale, and his mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. That's taken completely out of context," he stammered. "You don't understand how the business works, Jenna. These decisions, they're complex. They're not about shutting people down. They're about strategic positioning." "Strategic positioning," Jenna repeated, and there was no warmth left in her voice at all. Now, is that what you call it when you actively work to prevent another comedian from getting opportunities? Because I have 5 more emails here, Kevin. 5 more examples of you using your influence to block other people's careers. Kevin stood up abruptly from his chair, his microphone cord pulling taut. This is ridiculous. This is a setup. You brought me here under false pretenses to ambush me with stolen documents and twisted narratives. Sit down, Kevin, Jenna said firmly. We're not finished here. Actually, we are finished, Kevin shot back, his voice rising. I'm not going to sit here and let you destroy my reputation with lies and half-truths. But Jenna wasn't backing down. The only thing being destroyed here is the illusion that you're the humble comedian who just worked harder than everyone else. The truth is, you've been systematically eliminating competition for over a decade. That's not true, Kevin exploded, pointing his finger at Jenna. I've helped more comedians get opportunities than you could ever imagine. I've given people platform, I've opened doors, I've shared stages. You've helped comedians who weren't threats to you, Jenna fired back immediately. White comedians, female comedians, comedians who work in completely different styles. But when it comes to black male comedians who could potentially take some of your market share, you've been ruthless. The studio audience was completely silent now, but you could feel the energy in the room crackling with tension. Camera operators were zooming in on Kevin's face, capturing every emotion as it played across his features. Anger, fear, frustration, and something that looked almost like shame. You want to talk about ruthless? Kevin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let's talk about what you're doing right here, right now. You've ambushed me, you've presented stolen private communications, and you're trying to destroy my career and my reputation based on your interpretation of business decisions that you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Jenna replied coolly. I understand that Marcus Williams had to leave Los Angeles and move back to Philadelphia because he couldn't get work after you blacklisted him. I understand that Terrell Jackson is driving for a rideshare company right now because his comedy career was destroyed before it could really begin. I understand that at least 4 other comedians have similar stories. Kevin's hands were shaking now, and his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. You don't know what you're talking about. The entertainment industry is brutal for everyone. Not every comedian is going to make it to the top level. That's just reality. But it's not just about making it to the top level, Kevin. These comedians aren't asking to be the next Kevin Hart. They just wanted a fair chance to build their careers without you actively working against them. I never actively worked against anyone, Kevin protested, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier in the interview. Jenna pulled out another sheet of paper from her folder. Here's another email, Kevin. This one is to your agent at CA. You're discussing comedian DeMarcus Brown, who was being considered for a role in a comedy film that you were also up for. You wrote, DeMarcus is talented, but he's not ready for a leading role. I think the studio would be making a mistake casting him. You should let them know that I have concerns about his professionalism. Kevin's jaw dropped. Where did you get these? The question isn't where I got them, Kevin. The question is why you wrote them. Because DeMarcus Brown was absolutely ready for that role. In fact, several industry insiders told me he tested better than you did during his audition. Testing. Better doesn't mean anything, Kevin said weakly. There are so many factors that go into casting decisions. Like having Kevin Hart actively campaigning against you, Jenna said pointedly. DeMarcus didn't get that role, by the way, and 6 months later, he left Hollywood entirely. He's teaching high school theater now in Detroit. The weight of Jenna's words seemed to hit Kevin like a physical blow. He sat back down in his chair heavily, looking suddenly much smaller than he had when the interview began. Jenna, you're painting a picture that makes me look like some kind of monster, he said quietly. That's not who I am. I'm not perfect. I've made decisions in my career that were about protecting my interests. But that doesn't make me a bad person protecting your interests, Jenna repeated. At the expense of other people's dreams, at the expense of other people's livelihoods, at the expense of other people's families. Kevin looked up sharply. Don't you dare bring families into this. You brought families into it, Kevin, when you made decisions that prevented these comedians from providing for their children, from building the careers they'd worked their entire lives toward. The emotion in Kevin's voice was raw now. All pretense of media training abandoned. You think this business is easy. You think success just happens. I've worked 18-hour days for 20 years to get where I am. I've sacrificed everything. My first marriage, time with my kids, my health, everything to build this career. And you've prevented other people from having the chance to make those same sacrifices, Jenna shot back. You've decided that your success was more important than their opportunity to even try. Kevin stood up again, this time yanking the microphone completely off his jacket. This conversation is over. You've turned what was supposed to be a promotional interview into a character assassination, and I'm not going to participate in it. Anymore, running away doesn't change the truth. Kevin, Jenna called out as he started walking toward the edge of the stage. Kevin stopped dead in his tracks at the edge of the stage, his back still turned to Jenna and the cameras. The studio audience held their collective breath, waiting to see if he would actually walk off or if he would turn around and face the accusations head-on. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, frozen, his shoulders tense, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "The truth," he said finally, his voice barely audible through the studio microphones. "You want to talk about truth, Jenna?" He turned around slowly, and when the cameras caught his face, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted. Gone was the defensive anger. Gone was the media-trained composure. What remained was raw, unfiltered emotion that nobody in that studio had expected to see. "The truth is that I've been terrified every single day of my career that someone was going to come along and take everything I've worked for," Kevin said, walking back toward the interview area, but not sitting down. "The truth is that I grew up with nothing, absolutely nothing, and I've been fighting tooth and nail to make sure I never go back to that." Jenna sensed that something had changed in Kevin's demeanor, and she adjusted her approach accordingly. "So you admit that you've actively worked to eliminate competition?" "I admit that I've made decisions that were about protecting my career," Kevin replied, his voice steadier now but still thick with emotion. "But you're making it sound like I'm some kind of evil mastermind sitting in a dark room plotting against other comedians." "Then explain it to me, Kevin. Explain how those emails don't say exactly what they appear to say." Kevin began pacing back and forth in front of his chair, unable to stand still. "When I wrote those emails, when I made those recommendations, I wasn't thinking about destroying anyone's career. I was thinking about my own survival in an industry that chews people up and spits them out every single day." "But survival at what cost?" Jenna pressed. "When you told your manager that Terrell Jackson was too similar to your brand, you weren't just protecting your career, you were ending his—" "I didn't know it would end his career," Kevin said, and for the first time since the interview began, there was genuine vulnerability in his voice. "I thought he would find other opportunities. I thought he would keep pushing and eventually break through somewhere else." "You thought wrong," Jenna said bluntly, "and here's what makes this even worse. Kevin, you had the power to lift these comedians up instead of tearing them down. You could have been a mentor, a champion, someone who opened doors instead of slamming them shut." Kevin stopped pacing and looked directly at Jenna, his eyes glistening with what appeared to be the beginning of tears. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't carry that weight every day? You think I don't see their faces when I'm lying in bed at night, wondering if I'm really the person I tell myself I am?" The admission hung in the air like a confession, and even Jenna seemed momentarily taken aback by the depth of emotion Kevin was displaying. "Then why didn't you change? If you knew what you were doing was wrong, why didn't you stop?" Kevin's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Because I was a coward. Because I was so afraid of losing what I had that I couldn't see past my own fear. Because I convinced myself that business was just business, that everyone was playing the same game." "But everyone wasn't playing the same game. Kevin, you had power that those other comedians didn't have. You had influence, connections, resources. And instead of using those advantages to help your community, you used them to eliminate competition." "I know," Kevin said quietly, finally sitting back down in his chair. "I know exactly what I did, and I know exactly what it cost those men." The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the television cameras. This was no longer an interview or even a confrontation. This had become something much more personal and painful. "Marcus Williams is working construction now," Jenna said gently. "He gave up on comedy completely. He has 3 kids, and he's struggling to make ends meet, DeMarcus Brown, like I mentioned, is teaching high school. Terrell Jackson drives for rideshare companies, between comedy gigs at small clubs that barely pay enough to cover gas money. Each name seemed to hit Kevin, like a physical blow. What do you want me to do, Jenna? What do you want from me here? Do you want me to apologize? Do you want me to give up my career? Do you want me to write checks to make up for the opportunities I cost them? Tell me what you want. I want you. Not just to me, not just to this audience, but to them. I want you to take responsibility for the damage you've caused and figure out how to make it right. Kevin looked up from his hands, his eyes red and watery. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I hate that you're right. I hate that I became the kind of person who stepped on other people to get ahead. I hate that I betrayed my own community. I hate that I became everything I used to complain about when I was coming up. So what are you going to do about it? Jenna asked. I don't know, Kevin admitted. I honestly don't know how you make up for destroying someone's dreams. I don't know how you give back years of someone's life that they lost because of your selfishness. You start by admitting it publicly, Jenna said. You start by using your platform to tell the truth about what happened. You start by using your influence to create opportunities for the people you hurt instead of continuing to protect yourself from them. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I need to think about this. I need to figure out how to fix what I broke. Thinking about it isn't enough anymore. Kevin, Jenna pressed. These men have been waiting years for acknowledgement, for accountability, for someone to care about what happened to their careers, looking directly into the cameras for the first time since the emails had been revealed. You're asking me to admit publicly that I've been sabotaging other comedians for over a decade. Do you understand what that would do to my reputation, my career, my business relationships? I'm asking you to do the right thing, Jenna replied simply. Finally, Kevin stared at her for several seconds, and then, without warning, he stood up again and began walking toward the exit. But this time, his movement was different. There was no anger, no defiance, just exhaustion and defeat. Kevin, Jenna called. After him, where are you going? He paused at the edge of the stage, but didn't turn around. I'm going to call Marcus Williams, and then I'm going to call DeMarcus Brown, and then I'm going to call Terrell Jackson, and then I'm going to figure out how to be the person I should have been all along. And then, Jenna asked. Kevin finally turned around one last time, facing the cameras and the studio audience that had witnessed his complete unraveling. And then I'm going to come back here and tell the whole truth about what I've done. Not just the emails you have, Jenna. All of it. Every phone call, every conversation, every time I chose my fear over someone else's future. With that, Kevin Hart walked off the Jenna and Friends show stage, leaving behind one of the most explosive and emotional celebrity interviews in television history. The studio audience sat in stunned silence as Jenna looked directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Kevin Hart, and I think we all just witnessed something unprecedented. Whether he follows through on his promise remains to be seen. And there you have it, the complete breakdown of how Kevin Hart's appearance on the Jenna and Friends show turned into a career-defining moment that nobody saw coming. What do you think Kevin should do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that pull back the curtain on what really happens when the cameras are rolling.